Why is research so important to writers? Research is important because that's what gives you the details. That's what tells you what you need to add. That's what gives you insight into your characters, the landscape, the timeline. Good writers do an extensive amount of research. Good writers spend a lot of time in the libraries. Learn to love research. Research is an important tool. It's an empowering tool. As a writer, when you're able to research, when you dedicate time to research your story, what you will find is that writing gets easier. You get the tools, you get the details, you get things that adds flavor to your story. Research is really your friend. When you're researching historical fiction, for instance, what you want to do is to start by understanding that time period. Don't just read about that particular incident or that particular time frame alone. Read around it and then immerse yourself into that time period. And how do you do that? By reading widely. You want to start by looking at newspapers from that time period. You get an overview of what's happening. You get a lot of historical facts. What was important to people? What was happening at that time period? What were the key factors? But we are not just looking for facts. We are not writing a history text. We're looking for the flavor of that time period. You're building the background. You are creating the landscape. You're not going to add everything that you're going to read, but you will get an understanding of what things were like. Taking a step further, you then look at photographs. And what do you look out for? What did the streets look like? What were people wearing? What was the hairstyle? What was fashion in those days? And you can take that one step further and listen to oral interviews from that time period.
Before the war, food stuff was very cheap. You can buy a kati of rice for 5 cents.
There's nothing like listening to the way people spoke. People who've gone through that period of time, people who've experienced it. There's nothing like hearing it from them compared to reading it in a text. They would explain to you how they felt. They would describe it using words that you may not hear you may not read in a text because they might code switch. And all of this is so important to storytelling because when you create characters that are real, realistic, relatable, you want to also capture the way they spoke. It gives you an additional lens to understand the context and the historical background of the story that you're going to tell. When you're writing personal historical fiction, you have to take it one step further. You do that by asking questions to your family members, and ask them to sit down with you and tell their version of the story. You're going to have a far richer story, a text that you're going to be able to write. It starts a conversation of what happened, what were they thinking, and what is the story? Is it what we all know, or is there something else, something more to it? So create your own research. It's going to be incredibly rewarding. So how do you set up an interview with your family member? Get them comfortable, tell them you're going to ask them questions. They're usually excited about this. I generally try to get 2 people in the room because when one person says, oh, this is what happened. And the other person goes, no, you were just a little boy. You don't remember when electricity first came into our village. And people are generally very excited and very willing to share stories with you. They will tell you a lot more than just a story. They'll tell you, at that time, my father used to come home at this time. Or, when the riots came and we were not allowed to walk around. Or they'll tell you about friendships. They'll tell you a lot of other things. Just observe. Step back. Let them do the talking. Let them take the center stage. So you're going to want to record this. You're going to want to be able to hear it again because when you're seated with them, listening to their stories, going to be focusing probably on so many different things. You want to be able to go back and think about what you've heard. You want to be able to listen to it because not only are they part of your story, They're also part of your, family history. When you sit with them, don't be afraid to let the story evolve. Don't restrict them on what they tell you. Let them talk. As they talk, as they tell you different stories, keep an open mind about where you want the story to go. Good research should change the story. It should change your perspective. So I worked on this novel, a historical fiction novel titled SEMBAWANG, with my mother. She wrote it in Tamil, I translated it into English, and I worked on all the research on it. The story revolves around the Indian community, an Indian enclave in SEMBAWANG in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. The story is personal to the entire family because my father was born and raised in SEMBAWANG. My mother married and moved into SEMBAWANG, and there's so much nostalgia attached to this place, right? I mean, like when someone says, "Where are you from?" SEMBAWANG is such a special place to my family. And so my mom's here writing the story, and what do we include? What sort of historical, facts do we look out for? And my mom would tell me stories about, oh, this is what my neighbors did, and there was this moment my parents talked about sneaking away to the SEMBAWANG beach when my grandparents had gone to sleep. So I could never see them in that light. I never saw them in their 20s. And so it was deeply rewarding as a daughter to listen to those stories. It was also rewarding to bring those stories to life. When you create your own personal story, it allows you to not only understand where you come from better, but it allows you to understand the people around you. Actually, by asking these questions, by crystallizing your thoughts and the stories that you've heard on paper, it allows you to understand your family's history. It's an excuse for you to ask these questions, these burning questions that you've wanted to know. And it's an excuse for them to tell you the answers, an excuse for them to tell you stories about themselves, stories about their memories. It's an excuse for both of you to sit down together and to talk about something that matters. And that will become your story.